The autumn breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves and promises through downtown Winston-Salem, North Carolina, as Callie Wren hurried down Trade Street. Her floral dress fluttered around her knees, and she clutched her worn leather bag closer, checking her phone for the 100th time. The message from her best friend Tessa glowed on the screen. "You better not bail, girl. The reservation's at 7, table 23. Trust me on this one." Callie's heart fluttered like the pages of the children's books she read to her students every day. A blind date. She still couldn't believe she'd let Tessa talk her into this. At 31, she'd mastered the art of living in her comfortable bubble, teaching literature to elementary school kids, dreaming up stories in her notebook, and carefully avoiding anything that might lead to rejection. The hostess at the Ivory Room greeted her with a practiced smile. "Welcome, do you have a reservation?" "Yes, table 23. Callie's fingers absently traced her lips, a nervous habit she'd never managed to break. "Right this way." The restaurant was everything Callie wasn't. Sleek, sophisticated, sure of itself. Crystal chandeliers cast intimate shadows across dark wood tables, and the murmur of conversation mixed with the soft clink of expensive wine glasses. She followed the hostess, her well-worn sneakers silent against the plush carpet, feeling increasingly out of place. Table 23, or what she thought was table 23. Later, she would thank every star in the Carolina sky for her poor sense of direction and tendency to sit at wrong tables. A man sat there, his presence commanding even in stillness. He wore a perfectly tailored dark blazer, and his deep blue eyes caught the light when he looked up from his phone. A slight scar traced the edge of his strong jaw, and his dark brown hair was styled with careful precision. Something about him seemed both guarded and vulnerable, like a fortress with windows left unlocked. "Hi," Callie said, settling into the chair across from him. "I'm so sorry if I'm late. The traffic was terrible on 4th Street. She tucked a stray strand of her wavy brown hair behind her ear, wishing she'd worn something more sophisticated than her favorite vintage dress. The man studied her for a moment, something unreadable flickering across his features. "No apology necessary. I'm just glad you made it." His voice was deep, with an edge of warmth that seemed to surprise even him. "I'm Callie," she offered, her green eyes bright with nervous energy. "And I should probably confess that this is my first blind date. My friend Tessa practically had to drag me here." He smiled then, a small but genuine expression that transformed his entire face. "Thorne," he replied, his fingers tapping briefly against his old watch. A gesture she would later learn meant he was processing something important. "And would it make you feel better to know I'm equally out of my comfort zone?" For the next 2 hours, comfort zones became irrelevant. They talked about everything and nothing. Her students' latest attempts at writing their own stories, his dry observations, about corporate culture, their shared love of rainy days and breakfast for dinner. Callie found herself laughing more than she had in months, drawn into Thorne's subtle humor and the way he listened like every word mattered. What she didn't notice, what she wouldn't notice until much later, was that he never stood up. That his powerful shoulders and commanding presence masked a secret he wasn't ready to share. That when she asked about hiking trails in Pilot Mountain, a shadow crossed his face before he skillfully redirected the conversation. The evening flowed like honey, sweet and slow, until a confused server approached their table. "I'm sorry, but are you Ms. Richards? Your blind date has been waiting at table 23 for almost an hour." Callie's eyes widened in mortification. "Oh my God, this isn't table 23. She looked at Thorne, horror and embarrassment flooding her cheeks with color. "I am so sorry. I just assumed." But Thorne was looking at her with an expression that made her breath catch, like she was a plot twist he hadn't seen coming but desperately wanted to understand. "Don't apologize," he said softly. "Some mistakes are worth making." Her phone buzzed insistently, probably Tessa wondering what had happened. But Callie couldn't look away from Thorne's eyes, from the way the candlelight caught the edges of his scar, from the feeling that she'd stumbled into something both terrifying and wonderful. "I should probably go sort this out," she said reluctantly, reaching for her bag. "But would you like to keep talking?" Maybe over text, unless you think this whole mix-up is too weird. Thorne's fingers went to his watch again, that unconscious tell she was beginning to recognize. "I'd like that," he said, his voice carrying weight beyond the simple words. They exchanged numbers and Callie stood, still flushed with embarrassment and something else she couldn't quite name. As she turned to leave, he called after her. "Callie?" She looked back, caught in the intensity of his gaze. "Thank you for sitting at the wrong table." Walking home through the cooling North Carolina night, Callie couldn't stop smiling. Her phone already held a message from Thorne. The right mistakes, or just destiny being creative. She didn't know then about his wheelchair, about the accident that had rewritten his life script, about the fears that would nearly tear them apart before bringing them closer together. But she knew, with the same certainty that helped her choose the perfect books for her students, that something important had begun at that wrong table, something that felt terrifyingly, wonderfully right. Her thumbs hovered over her phone as she crafted her reply, the streetlights casting warm hollows in the gathering dusk, and somewhere across Winston-Salem, a man who had stopped believing in chance sat in his wheelchair, watching his phone, hoping she would understand why he couldn't tell her everything. Not yet. The night air carried the whisper of falling leaves and new beginnings, and two people who had never planned to meet began writing their story, one text message at a time. Morning light filtered through the windows of Callie's third grade classroom at Riverside Community School, catching dust motes that danced like tiny stars. She sat at her desk, absently stirring her coffee in her favorite mug, one covered in quotes from The Little Prince, while staring at her phone. 7:02 a.m. Good morning. Still wondering if last night was real, or if I imagined our entire conversation about the superiority of breakfast foods at dinner time. Thorne's message made her smile. They'd been texting since she'd left the restaurant the night before. Conversations, flowing effortlessly into the early hours until exhaustion finally claimed them both. Her fingers moved across the screen. Very real. Though I maintain that pancakes taste better by streetlight. The reply came almost instantly. Scientific evidence needed, preferably in the form of a detailed PowerPoint presentation. In her classroom, surrounded by colorful book displays and student artwork, Callie felt brave. Braver than she'd been at the restaurant, braver than she usually allowed herself to be. "I could demonstrate in person instead," she typed, then held her breath. The three dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, rain check. Crazy day of meetings ahead. But I'd love to hear about your day later. Something in her chest deflated slightly, but she pushed the feeling aside. Deal. Try not to fall asleep in those meetings. Impossible, I'm running them. A knock at her classroom door pulled her attention away. Tessa stood there, radiant in a yellow dress that complemented her dark skin perfectly, her corkscrew curls, with auburn tips bouncing as she practically vibrated with curiosity. "Girl, you have some explaining to do." Tessa strode in, setting her extra-large iced coffee on Callie's desk. "First, you stand up your actual blind date. Who, by the way, was a total dud, so good call there. Then you disappear for the whole night and your texts are all cryptic and happy. Spill." Callie felt her cheeks warm. "I may have accidentally sat at the wrong table." "You what?" Tessa's golden brown eyes widened with delight. "And met someone. Amazing." Callie finished, unable to keep the smile from her face. She told Tessa everything. About Thorne's quiet intensity, their instant connection, the way hours had felt like minutes. "Hold up," Tessa interrupted, pulling up a tiny student chair and perching on it somehow gracefully. "Thorne Ellison? The tech genius Thorne Ellison? The billionaire who revolutionized adaptive technology? That Thorne?" Callie blinked. "I don't know. We didn't really talk about work specifics. He mentioned something about tech development, but..." Tessa was already pulling up articles on her phone. "Oh my God, it is him. Look." The screen showed a business magazine cover from 2 years ago. Thorne looked younger, his face unscarred, standing in front of a sleek office building. The headline read, "Ellison Tech's Revolutionary Approach to Accessible Innovation." Wow, Callie breathed, studying the image. Something shifted in her chest, not because of his success or wealth, but because in the photo his smile didn't reach his eyes. It was nothing like the genuine warmth she'd glimpsed last night. And you just happened to sit at his table? Tessa shook her head in amazement. Girl, that's some romantic comedy-level serendipity right there. The first bell rang, and the hallway outside began filling with the sounds of arriving students. Tessa stood gathering her things. Just be careful, okay? Rich guys can be complicated. It's not about money, Callie protested. You should have seen how he lit up when we talked about random things, like his theory about why Thursday is the most underrated day of the week. Honey, I love you and your beautiful heart, Tessa said softly. Just remember that everyone has secrets. Throughout the day, between teaching her students about similes and helping them craft their own stories, Callie's phone buzzed with messages from Thorne. They were little things, observations about his meetings, questions about her favorite childhood books, a debate about the best kind of cookie. He argued for chocolate chip, she championed snickerdoodles. During her lunch break, she found herself Googling him, guilt gnawing at her conscience even as she clicked. Articles mentioned his company's focus on adaptive technology, but most were from over 2 years ago. More recent mentions were rare and mostly business-focused. It felt wrong somehow learning about him this way instead of through their conversations. By evening, as she curled up on her worn leather couch with a cup of tea, their texts had evolved into something deeper. Thorne, what makes you love teaching? Callie, the moments when a kid finally connects with a story, when they see themselves in a character and realize they're not alone, that they can be the hero of their own story. Thorne, you give them hope. Callie, I try. Everyone deserves to feel seen. There was a long pause before his next message. What if being seen is what terrifies you? The vulnerability in those words made her heart ache. She thought carefully before responding. Then you find someone who makes being seen feel safe. Another pause, longer this time. You're dangerous, Callie Wren. Why? Because you make me want to be brave. She hugged her knees to her chest, staring at those words. Is that a bad thing? I'm still figuring that out. Days passed in a blur of messages. They shared songs that reminded them of each other. Sent her pictures of the sunrise from his office window. She replied with photos of her students' artwork. They talked about everything except meeting again, and Callie tried to ignore the growing ache of missing someone she'd only met once. A week after their chance encounter, late at night, Thorne's message caught her off guard. Do you believe in fate? I believe in beautiful accidents, she replied, like sitting at the wrong table and finding the right person. What if that person isn't who you think they are? Callie sat up in bed, her heart pounding. We're all more than we appear to be. Some differences are bigger than others. Thorne, she typed, then paused, choosing her words carefully. Whatever you're afraid to tell me, it won't change how I feel about our conversations, about you. The response took so long that she thought he'd fallen asleep. Finally, I want to believe that. Then let me prove it. But his next message changed the subject, asking about her plans to write children's books, and Callie felt the moment slip, away like water through her fingers. In her classroom the next morning, as she watched her students work on their creative writing projects, she thought about stories, how they begin, how they unfold, how sometimes the most important chapters are the ones where nothing seems to happen, but everything changes. Her phone buzzed with a message from Thorne. You make me forget to be careful. She smiled, typing back, maybe careful is overrated. What she didn't say, what she held close to her heart, was how he made her forget to be afraid. How their digital conversations had become the highlight of her days. How she was falling for someone who seemed simultaneously so open and so hidden. Outside her classroom window, autumn leaves continued their dance, and somewhere across the city, a man who had built his life around careful control was learning that some walls are meant to fall, even if the crash terrifies you. The innovation, district of Winston-Salem hummed with morning energy as Thorne Ellison guided his motorized wheelchair through the modern lobby of the Ellison Tech Building. Floor-to-ceiling windows caught the October sunlight, casting long shadows across polished concrete floors. Employees nodded respectfully as he passed, but he noticed the familiar flicker in their eyes, that mixture of admiration and pity he'd grown to hate. His executive assistant, Ramon Chen, fell into step beside him, tablet in hand. The development team is ready for the accessibility features review, and the board wants to move up the quarterly meeting to next week. Schedule. The board for Thursday, Thorne replied, navigating toward his private elevator. And tell development I'll be there in 10. His fingers brushed against his old watch, a habit that had intensified since meeting Callie. In his top-floor office, he allowed himself a moment of vulnerability, rubbing his temples as he looked at their morning text exchange. Callie. My students are writing their own fairy tales today. Pretty sure one of them is about a dragon who runs a food truck. The message made him smile despite his exhaustion. Now that's a business model I'd invest in. Speaking of food, dinner sometime this week? His chest tightened. 2 weeks had passed since their chance meeting, and he'd run out of excuses to delay seeing her again. Each deflection felt like swallowing glass, but the thought of watching her face change when she saw his wheelchair. Rain check? Crazy week ahead with the board? There was a longer pause than usual before her reply. You know, for a guy who runs his own company, you sure have a lot of bosses telling you what to do. The gentle challenge in her words hit home. Before he could respond, Ramon appeared at his door. Development's ready. Thorne locked his phone, pushing away the guilt. In the conference room, his team presented their latest innovations in adaptive technology. Software that could track eye movements for people with limited mobility, voice-activated systems for smart homes, applications that could translate sign language in real time. The market for accessible tech is expanding, Dr. Amara Patel, his head of R&D, explained, but we're the only ones approaching it from lived experience. Thorne nodded, his hands resting on his wheelchair's controls. After his accident 2 years ago, he'd redirected his entire company toward accessibility innovation. It gave purpose to his pain, turned his limitations into inspiration, but it hadn't healed everything. His phone buzzed again. Callie had sent a photo, a child's drawing of a green dragon wearing a chef's hat, serving tacos from a truck covered in fairy lights. The simple joy of it made his carefully constructed walls crack just a little. Mr. Ellison? Dr. Patel's voice pulled him back. Your input on the neural interface project? He focused on the presentation, pushing thoughts of Callie aside. But throughout the day, she kept finding ways back in, her messages like persistent sunlight through his carefully drawn blinds. By evening, as the office emptied and the city lights began to twinkle, Thorne found himself alone with his thoughts and his fears. He wheeled to the window wall, looking out over Winston-Salem's skyline. His reflection stared back. Successful businessman, technological innovator, broken man in a wheelchair. His phone lit up with another message from Callie. Just finished. Reading The Little Prince to my class. Made me think of you when we got to the part about taming the fox. About how making connections means becoming responsible for what you've tamed. The words hit him like a physical blow. He'd been reading, meaning into every text, every shared joke, every late-night conversation, and so had she. Callie, he typed, then deleted it. Started again. I need to tell you something. Deleted that too. Finally. The book's right. About responsibility. About how seeing with the heart matters more than eyes. Her response came, quickly, then why won't you let me see you again? The directness of her question made his hands shake slightly. Because I'm afraid of what you'll see. I already see you, Thorne. Every message, every conversation, that's the real you. He stared at those words until they blurred. What if the physical reality disappoints you? What if you let me decide that for myself? A knock at his office door made him jump. Ramon stood there, concern evident on his face. Sir? It's past 8. Do you need anything before I head out? Thorne shook his head. realizing he'd lost track of time again. "No, thanks, Ramon. Have a good night." After his assistant left, Thorne wheeled to his desk, opening his laptop. With a few clicks, he pulled up the security feeds from the night of his dinner with Callie. He'd watched this footage more times than he cared to admit. The way she'd walked into the restaurant, uncertain, but determined. How her whole face had lit up when she laughed. The moment she'd realized her mistake but hadn't wanted to leave. She hadn't seen his wheelchair then. Hadn't known that the table had been carefully chosen to hide it. That he'd manipulated the entire situation to preserve a perfect moment he knew couldn't last. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Callie. "My grandmother used to say that the scariest doors often lead to the most beautiful rooms, but you have to be brave enough to turn the handle." Thorne closed his eyes, feeling the weight of choices and consequences. When he opened them, he began to type. "Coffee tomorrow? There's a place near your school. The Wanderlust Cafe." The 3 dots appeared immediately. "Yes, what time?" His heart raced as he replied, 4:30, after your classes? I'll be there." He set the phone down, his hands trembling slightly. Tomorrow, everything would change. She would see him, all of him. And he'd have to face whatever came next. Across the city, in her small apartment filled with books and hope, Callie hugged her phone to her chest, unaware that the man she was falling for was sitting in darkness, trying to find the courage to be seen. Later that night, as he lay in bed, his phone lit up one last time. "Callie, thank you for being brave." Thorne stared at the message for a long time, wondering if bravery and terror could occupy the same heart. Tomorrow would answer that question, one way or another. Outside his penthouse windows, the city sparkled like scattered stars, and somewhere in that constellation of lights was a woman who made him want to risk everything, even if everything meant losing her. His final message of the night was simple. "Thank you for making me want to try." In the quiet hours before dawn, 2 people lay awake in different parts of the city, both wondering if tomorrow would be the beginning of something beautiful or the end of something precious. Both hoping that when morning came, courage would be stronger than fear. The Wanderlust Cafe buzzed with afternoon energy as Callie pushed through the door. The bell's gentle chime almost lost in the whir of coffee, grinders, and indie music. Her heart thundered against her ribs as she scanned the room, but Thorne wasn't there yet. 4:25 p.m. She was early. She chose a table near the window, smoothing her favorite blue dress, the one that made her feel both pretty and brave. Her third graders had noticed her distraction all day, especially when she'd accidentally called their class pet hamster Thorn instead of Thunder. The cafe's walls were lined with local artwork and mismatched bookshelves, giving it a cozy, lived-in feel. Perfect for a second first meeting, she thought, trying to calm her nerves. Her phone lit up. Running a few minutes late, traffic on. 4th. She ordered a chai latte, wrapping her hands around the warm mug and watching condensation draw patterns on the window. Outside, fallen leaves chased each other across the sidewalk, and the late October sky threatened rain. At 4:40, the cafe's door opened. Callie's breath caught in her throat as Thorne appeared, but not in the way she'd expected. He entered in a sleek, motorized wheelchair, his powerful shoulders and familiar profile exactly as she remembered, but now she understood why he'd been so afraid. Their eyes met across the room. She saw the moment of terror flash across his face, the instinct to flee warring with something else. Hope, maybe, or desperation. Callie stood, her heart racing for entirely different reasons now. She walked toward him, watching as he braced himself for her reaction. But all she could think about was how his blue eyes still made her pulse skip, how his presence still filled the room. "Hi," she said softly, stopping in front of him. "Hi," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. His fingers went to his watch, that nervous tell she'd grown to cherish through their texts. "Your table or mine?" she asked, gesturing to both options, her window seat and an accessible table near the counter. Something in his expression shifted, softened. "Yours works." If you don't mind moving the extra chair. She did, and they settled into a moment heavy with unspoken words. Thorne ordered a black coffee, his movements precise and practiced as he positioned his wheelchair at the table. So, Callie said finally, this is why Thursday is your favorite day. Less traffic for driving. A startled laugh escaped him. That's your first question? Would you prefer something more dramatic? I thought, he paused, studying her face. I expected pity? She shook her head. Thorne, I've spent 2 weeks falling for your mind, your humor, the way you see the world. This, she gestured to his wheelchair, doesn't change who you are in all those messages. His hands tightened on his armrests. It changes everything, only if you let it. She reached across the table, not quite touching him, but leaving her hand there in offer. Though I am a little hurt you didn't trust me enough to tell me. Trust isn't the issue, he said quietly. I've had 2 years of people looking at me differently once they know. Business partners who talk about inspiration and overcoming odds. Women who see a project or a tragedy instead of a man. His jaw clenched. I wanted to keep living in those messages where I was just me. You're still you, Callie said firmly. A successful tech innovator who thinks breakfast food tastes better at night, believes Thursdays are underrated and makes terrible puns when he's tired. The server brought Thorne's coffee, and Callie watched as he doctored it with a precision that spoke of routine. His movements were confident, practiced, but she could sense the tension in his shoulders, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The accident was 2 years ago, he said finally, his voice low. Black ice on I-40. The doctor said I was lucky. His laugh held no humor. Spinal cord injury, T10 complete. Means I have no movement or sensation from about waist level down. Is that why you redirected your company toward adaptive technology? He looked surprised that she knew. You Googled me. Just once, she admitted, when Tessa recognized your name. But I stopped because it felt wrong learning about you that way instead of from you. Thunder rumbled outside and rain began to tap against the windows. The cafe's lights seemed to glow warmer, creating a bubble of intimacy around their table. The company shift wasn't entirely altruistic, Thorne continued. I needed purpose, a way to make sense of. He gestured to his legs. This, and there, were so many gaps in accessible tech, so many ways to make life better for people like me. That sounds pretty altruistic to me, Callie said softly. He met her eyes then, really met them. Why aren't you running? Because I don't want to. She finally bridged the gap between them, laying her hand over his where it rested on the table. His skin was warm, and she felt the slight tremor in his fingers. I want to know you, all of you. The parts you're proud of and the parts you're afraid to show. A mix of emotions crossed his face. Hope, fear, desire, disbelief. I can't give you a normal relationship. Normal is overrated. She squeezed his hand. And you don't get to decide what I want or need. That's my choice. The rain fell harder outside, drumming against the windows. In the gray light, Thorne's eyes seemed deeper, more vulnerable. I'm not an easy man to love, Callie. Good thing I enjoy a challenge. She smiled, then sobered. I'm not asking for promises, Thorne. Just a chance. For both of us. He turned his hand under hers, intertwining their fingers. The gesture felt more intimate than a kiss. I'm still terrified, he admitted. Me too. She ran her thumb across his knuckles. But maybe that's how we know it matters. They sat there as the afternoon faded into evening, talking about everything. Now, his physical therapy routine, her dream of writing children's books, the adaptations in his penthouse, her collection of literary coffee mugs. The rain created a cocoon around them, and slowly, Callie watched Thorne's defenses crumble. When they finally left the cafe, the rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet pavement and possibilities. Thorne's wheelchair glided smoothly beside her as they moved toward the parking lot. Thank you, he said suddenly, for making me brave enough to do this. Callie stopped, turning to face him. In the streetlight, his face held a vulnerability that made her heart ache. "Thank you for trusting me with your truth." He reached for her hand, tugging her closer. Looking up at her from his chair, he seemed to make a decision. "Would it be okay if I kissed you?" Instead of answering, Callie leaned down, cupping his face in her hands. Their lips met softly at first, then with growing certainty. His hands came up to tangle in her hair, and she felt the strength in them, the tenderness. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Thorne pressed his forehead to hers. "Stay," he whispered. "Not just tonight, but in my life. Stay." "I'm not going anywhere," she promised, and sealed it with another kiss. Above them, the clouds parted, revealing a scatter of stars. And in a cafe parking lot in Winston-Salem, two people who had been afraid to be seen finally allowed themselves to be known. Wheelchairs, walls, and all. November painted Winston-Salem in shades of amber and gold as Callie climbed into her car after school, excitement bubbling in her chest. It had been 2 weeks since the cafe, 2 weeks of discovering how love could feel when it was both terrifying and right. Her phone buzzed with Thorne's message. "Still on for dinner? I'm cooking." "Should I be worried?" she typed back, smiling. "Only if you don't like Italian. My grandmother's recipes are foolproof." The drive to Thorne's penthouse in the renovated Tobacco Warehouse district took 15 minutes. She'd been there twice before, but tonight felt different, more intimate. The security guard in the lobby nodded in recognition as she headed for the private elevator, the one Thorne had programmed to recognize her access code. The elevator opened directly into his home, and the first thing that hit her was the smell of garlic and herbs. The second was the sight of Thorne in his kitchen, maneuvering expertly between the lowered countertops as he stirred something that made her mouth water. "That smells amazing," she said, setting down her bag and walking over to kiss him. He pulled her closer, one hand leaving the wheelchair's control to tangle in her hair. "Hi," he murmured against her lips. "Hi yourself." She looked around at the kitchen, noticing new details. Everything was arranged at accessible height with clever pull-down shelving systems and modified appliances. "Can I help?" "You can open the wine. Red, in the rack by the fridge." He gestured with his chin as he returned to stirring. "How are the kids today?" "Excited about the creative writing contest next week." She found the wine and glasses, moving with growing familiarity through his space. "Though I had to explain why we can't have a real dragon as a judge." His laugh, rich and genuine, filled the kitchen. It was a sound she heard more often now, and each time felt like a gift. Clearly a missed opportunity in the education system. As they worked together, Callie chopping herbs while Thorne finished the sauce, she marveled at how naturally they'd fallen into this dance. How they'd learned to navigate around each other, his wheelchair becoming just another part of their choreography. Over dinner, perfectly cooked pasta with a sauce that made Callie close her eyes in bliss. Thorne grew quieter, thoughtful. She'd learned to read his moods, to recognize when something was brewing behind those blue eyes. "What is it?" she asked finally, reaching across the table to touch his hand. He turned his palm up to meet hers. "The company's annual charity gala is next weekend." "Oh?" She kept her tone neutral, knowing there was more. "I'd like you to come. As my date." His fingers tightened slightly on hers. "But it would be very public. Press will be there. Photos. Questions." Understanding dawned. "You haven't been seen publicly with anyone since the accident?" "No." He met her eyes. "The business world knows me as the tech genius who turned tragedy into innovation. They respect that narrative. But bringing you, it changes the story. And that scares you?" "Not for me." His thumb traced patterns on her wrist. "But once you're connected to me publicly, the scrutiny starts. They'll dig into your life, your work. You'll be the woman dating the guy in the wheelchair. I don't want that label for you." Callie stood, walking around the table to face him. In her flat shoes, they were almost at eye level. "First, bold of you to assume I'm not using you for your excellent pasta sauce. That startled a laugh out of him. Second, she continued, taking his face in her hands, I'm a grown woman who can handle whatever labels people want to throw at me. The only ones that matter are the ones we choose for ourselves. His hands came up to circle her waists, drawing her closer. And what labels would those be? Well, right now I'm choosing woman who is falling ridiculously in love with a complicated man who thinks too much. The words hung between them, the first time either had come close to saying it. Thorne's breath caught. Callie, you don't have to say it back, she whispered. Just take me to the gala. Let me stand beside you. The rest is just noise. He pulled her down onto his lap, something he'd been hesitant to do until recently. She settled naturally, feeling the strength in his arms as they wrapped around her. What did I do to deserve you? You sat at the wrong table. Later that evening, as they sat on his balcony watching the city lights twinkle, Thorne showed her something on his tablet. Designs for new adaptive technology his company was developing. His eyes lit up as he explained the potential applications, how it could help people with various disabilities live more independently. This is what I want them to see, he said softly. Not just the wheelchair, but what came after. What's still possible. Then show them, Callie replied, curled against his chest in the cool night air. Show them that love and innovation and hope aren't limited by anything. Not wheelchairs, not expectations, not fear. His hand traced lazy patterns on her back. My PT mentioned something interesting today, about how recovery isn't just physical. How sometimes the hardest muscles to rehabilitate are the ones around our hearts. And how's that rehabilitation going? Better, he murmured into her hair. Every day with you, better. The week leading up to the gala brought new tensions. Tessa helped Callie shop for the perfect dress, a deep emerald silk that made her eyes glow. But there were also moments of doubt, not about Thorne, but about the world they'd have to face. One evening as they left a restaurant where the hostess had spoken only to Callie, ignoring Thorne completely, she saw the familiar tightness in his jaw. I hate that you have to deal with that, she said in the car. I'm used to it. You shouldn't have to be. She turned to face him. But it doesn't change us. Nothing they do or say changes what we're building. His hand found hers in the darkness. And what are we building, Ms. Wren? Something real, she said simply. Something that started with a mistake and turned into the best decision I never meant to make. That night after he dropped her home, Thorne sat in his penthouse looking at an old photo from before the accident. The man in the picture was standing, successful, completely unaware that his life was about to change forever. But as he set the photo aside and looked at a new one on his phone, Callie laughing as she tried to teach him her favorite childhood hand-clapping game, he realized something profound. Sometimes the best parts of life came after the breaking. Sometimes love showed up at exactly the wrong time, at exactly the wrong table, with exactly the right heart. His phone lit up with a message from Callie. Just remembered I never told you the end of the dragon food truck story. My student gave him a happy ending, said sometimes the scariest looking things turn out to be the most wonderful. Thorne smiled, typing back, Smart kid. Smart teacher, she replied. See you tomorrow? I'll bring breakfast for dinner. Wouldn't miss it. Outside, the November wind swept leaves into spiral dances, and somewhere in Winston-Salem, a woman who had accidentally found love was planning to face the world's judgments head-on, while a man who had forgotten how to hope was remembering, one heartbeat at a time. The grand ballroom of the Cardinal Hotel sparkled with crystal chandeliers and possibility. Callie stood before the floor-length mirror in the powder room, her emerald, silk dress catching the light as Tessa made final adjustments to her hair. Girl, you look like $1 million, Tessa declared, tucking one last pin into the soft waves cascading over Callie's shoulder. Though dating a billionaire, maybe I should say billion. Tessa. But Callie couldn't help smiling. Her best friend had insisted on being her getting-ready partner, knowing how nervous she was about tonight. What? Just stating facts? Tessa stepped back, admiring her work. But seriously, are you ready for this? The press will be all over you two. Callie touched the delicate silver necklace Thorne had given her earlier that day, a small key, pendant that made her think of all the doors they'd opened together. I'm ready to stand beside him, the rest doesn't matter. Her phone buzzed. Waiting in the lobby whenever you're ready. No rush. Just missing you. Tessa read the message over her shoulder and squeezed her arm. That man is so gone for you. Now go make your grand entrance. I'll be at our table cheering you on. The hotel lobby was quieter than the ballroom, but Callie could hear the murmur of the gala in full swing. Thorne waited near the elevators, striking in a black tuxedo that had been perfectly tailored to him sitting down. His chair was the sleekest model she'd seen yet. Matte black with subtle, chrome accents that made it look more like a throne than a medical device. His eyes widened when he saw her, and something in her chest fluttered at his expression. You're breathtaking, he said softly as she approached. You're not so bad yourself. She leaned down to kiss him, not caring who saw. When she pulled back, his eyes were darker, intense. Last chance to run, he murmured. Once we go through those doors. Not running. She straightened his bow tie slightly. Not now. Not ever. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. Ready to face the wolves? Lead the way. The ballroom doors opened, and conversations stuttered to a halt as they entered. Callie felt the weight of hundreds of eyes, heard the whispers start. But she kept her head high, her hand resting lightly on Thorne's shoulder as they made their way through the crowd. Ramon appeared at their side, efficient as always. Mr. Ellison, the press would like some photos before dinner. Thorne's jaw tightened slightly, but he nodded. As they moved toward the designated photo area, Callie noticed how people parted before them, some with respect, others with barely concealed curiosity. The cameras started clicking immediately. Callie had never been photographed professionally before, but she found her rhythm, standing beside Thorne's chair with natural grace. He answered questions with practiced ease, his hand never leaving hers. Mr. Ellison, can you tell us about your companion? This is Callie Wren, he said, his voice carrying both pride and challenge. She's an elementary school teacher who's revolutionizing how children see the world through literature. A reporter stepped forward, her sharp eyes assessing Callie. Ms. Wren, how did you and Mr. Ellison meet? Callie felt Thorne tense, but she smiled. I sat at the wrong table at a restaurant. Turned out to be the best mistake of my life. The cameras clicked faster, and she could practically see the headlines forming. But then Thorne added, sometimes fate has better plans than we do. The moment was interrupted by Dr. Patel approaching with an elderly gentleman Callie didn't recognize. Mr. Ellison, Professor Chen from MIT is eager to discuss the Neural Interface Project. Thorne squeezed Callie's hand. Will you be okay if I... Go, she assured him. I'll find our table. As she watched him wheel away, already deep in conversation about technology that could change lives, a woman in an expensive suit sidled up to her. You know, dear, it's very noble what you're doing. Callie turned confused. I'm sorry? Taking care of him. It must be such a challenge, but so rewarding to help someone in his condition. The words hit like ice water. I'm not his caregiver, Callie said firmly. I'm his partner, and the only challenge is dealing with people who can't see past a wheelchair to the brilliant, passionate man sitting in it. She walked away before the woman could respond, her heart pounding. At their assigned table, she found Tessa, who took one look at her face and handed her a glass of champagne. What happened? Callie told her about the woman's assumption, still fuming. How can they not see him? Really see him? Some people have walls in their minds, Tessa said gently. But, honey, look. Across the room, Thorne was demonstrating something on a tablet to a group of captivated investors. His eyes were bright with passion, his hands moving expressively as he explained complex concepts. Several people were taking notes. "They're seeing him now," Tessa pointed out. "The innovator. The visionary. And you know what else they're seeing? The way he keeps looking over here at you like you hung the moon." Dinner was served, an elegant affair with multiple courses. Thorne rejoined them, immediately sensing Callie's mood. "What's wrong?" She shook her head, managing a smile. "Nothing important. Tell me about the neural interface project." His eyes lit up again as he explained, and she let his enthusiasm wash away the bitter taste of that earlier conversation. Under the table, their hands found each other, fingers intertwining. After dinner, soft music filled the ballroom as couples moved to dance. Callie watched them, not with longing, but with contemplation. Thorne noticed. "I'm sorry, I can't." "Don't," she interrupted. "Dance with me here." She placed their joined hands over his heart. His breath caught as she leaned closer, swaying slightly to the music. They created their own dance, there at the table, her standing beside his chair, his arms around her waist, moving together to a rhythm only they could feel. "I love you," he said suddenly, the words rough with emotion. "I should have said it back that night at my place. I love you, Callie Wren, and you terrify me in the best possible way." She turned in his arms to face him, not caring about the tears threatening to spill. "I love you too. Every part of you. Every challenge. Every victory." Someone nearby was definitely taking photos, but neither of them noticed. They were too lost in their own private dance, their own declaration of love amid the sparkle and shine of Winston-Salem's elite. Later that night, as they left the gala, Ramon handed Thorne a tablet with early social media coverage. Photos of them were already trending, but not with the headlines they'd feared. Tech innovator and educator's love story captures hearts. Ellison Tech CEO finds love in unexpected places. Modern romance, when sitting at the wrong table, leads to Mr. Right. In the car heading home, Callie rested her head on Thorne's shoulder. "See, they saw the story we wanted to tell." "No," he corrected softly, "they saw the truth." "Finally, so did I." The city streets glowed with possibility as they drove through the night. And somewhere in the digital ether, their story was already spreading. Not a tale of disability and nobility, but one of love that saw beyond barriers, beyond wheelchairs, beyond fear itself. And in the quiet of their hearts, both Callie and Thorne knew that this was just the beginning of their dance. December brought early snow to Winston-Salem, dusting the city in white as Callie rushed through her apartment, gathering last-minute items. The past month since the gala had been a whirlwind of love and adjustment, of learning each other's rhythms and challenges. But today marked a new milestone, meeting Thorne's family. Her phone buzzed with his message. "They're running early, landing in 20 minutes." Callie's stomach twisted. Thorne's parents were flying in from Boston, his mother, a retired judge, and his father, a neurosurgeon. They hadn't visited since before the accident, maintaining their relationship through careful phone calls and video chats. "Breathe," she reminded herself, checking her reflection one last time. She'd chosen a conservative blue sweater dress, wanting to make a good impression. But it was hard to feel confident when Thorne had been so tense about this visit. The drive to his penthouse was treacherous with fresh snow. Inside, she found him in his home office on a video call with his development team. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes betraying nights of poor sleep. "Push the testing phase to January," he was saying. "We can't risk—" He broke off as he saw her, his face softening. "Meeting adjourned. Updates by end of day." As soon as the screen went dark, Callie moved behind him, massaging his tight shoulders. "When did you last sleep?" "Define sleep," he muttered, leaning back into her touch. "They're coming to evaluate me, to see if I'm really managing, if I'm really okay." "You're more than okay," she said firmly. "You're extraordinary." Before he could respond, the intercom buzzed. Ramon's voice came through. "Sir, your parents have arrived. They're on their way up." Thorne's shoulders tensed again under Callie's hands. She squeezed once more, then moved to stand beside him as the elevator doors opened. Catherine Ellison entered first, tall, elegant, with Thorne's blue eyes and an expression that could probably crack granite. Behind her came Robert Ellison, gray-haired and distinguished, carrying expensive luggage with practiced ease. "Darling," Catherine said, moving forward to kiss Thorne's cheek. Her eyes flickered to his wheelchair, then away, so quickly Callie almost missed it. Almost. "Mother, father." Thorne's voice was carefully neutral. "This is Callie Wren." Catherine's assessment was swift and clinical. "Yes, we saw the gala photos. You're a teacher, correct?" "Elementary school literature," Callie confirmed, shaking both parents' hands. "It's wonderful to meet you." Catherine looked around the penthouse. "You've changed things since our last video call." "Adaptive renovations," Thorne explained. "The company's been testing new home automation systems." Robert spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of medical authority. "And how's your physical therapy progressing? Any new sensation below the injury site?" "No changes, father." As expected, the tension in the room could have been cut with a scalpel. Callie touched Thorne's shoulder lightly. "I'll make some coffee. Would anyone like some?" In the kitchen, she could hear their voices, discussing Thorne's medical routine, his business, decisions, everything except what he might actually want to talk about. She returned with coffee to find Catherine examining the new pull-down cabinet system. "Very clever," his mother said, "though it must be difficult, managing alone." "He's not alone," Callie said quietly but firmly. "And he manages beautifully." Catherine's eyes narrowed slightly. "Of course, you're here quite often from what I understand." "Mother," Thorne warned, "I'm simply trying to understand the arrangement." Catherine sipped her coffee. "After all, your position makes you vulnerable to certain opportunities." The word hung in the air like poison. "Opportunities," Callie repeated, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You must understand our concern," Robert interjected. "Thorne's condition requires significant support, and given his resources—" "My condition," Thorne cut in, his voice sharp, "doesn't prevent me from knowing my own heart, or recognizing real love when I find it." Catherine set down her cup. "Darling, we only want to protect you. After everything that happened with Regina—" "Don't!" Thorne's hands gripped his armrests. "Don't bring her into this." Callie's mind raced. Regina, the name was new, another piece of Thorne's past she hadn't known about. "Your mother's right," Robert said. "After she left you in the hospital—" "Enough." Thorne's voice could have frozen flame. "Callie isn't Regina. She isn't an opportunity or a risk or whatever else you're implying. She's the woman I love. The woman who saw me when I was hiding, who made me brave enough to live again." Silence fell. Callie moved to stand beside his chair, her hand finding his shoulder. He covered it with his own, gripped tight. "Perhaps," Catherine said carefully, "we should discuss this later. We'll check into our hotel and return for dinner." "Fine." Thorne's voice was clipped. "Ramon will send a car." After they left, the silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Finally, Callie asked softly, "Who's Regina?" Thorne wheeled to the window, staring out at the falling snow. "My fiancée, before the accident." His laugh was bitter. "She lasted exactly 2 weeks in the hospital before deciding she couldn't handle it. Couldn't handle me being different." Callie's heart ached. "Thorne." She left a note. Said she was sorry, but this wasn't the future she'd signed up for. He, turned to face Callie, his eyes haunted. "That's why my parents are like this. They watched it break me. Watched me build walls so high I thought no one would ever get in again. Until a clumsy teacher sat at the wrong table," Callie said softly, moving to kneel beside his chair. "And destroyed every defense I had." His hand cupped her cheek. "I should have told you about Regina. You told me when you were ready." She turned her face to kiss his palm. "But your parents need to understand something. I'm not here because you need support or protection. I'm here because loving you is as natural as breathing." His thumb, traced her cheekbone. Even with all the complications? The medical routines, the adaptive requirements, the public scrutiny? Those aren't complications, Thorn. They're just parts of our story. Like my tendency to get lost, or how I cry at coffee commercials, or how we both think breakfast food tastes better at midnight. A real smile finally touched his lips. God, I love you. Good. She stood, straightening her dress. Because I'm not going anywhere. And by the end of this visit, your parents are going to understand that. Snow continued to fall outside, but inside something had shifted. A truth had been revealed, a wound exposed to healing air. And as Thorn pulled Callie onto his lap, holding her close, they both knew that sometimes the hardest storms brought the clearest skies. Later, as they prepared for dinner, Callie watched Thorn expertly manipulating the controls of his chair while simultaneously texting Ramon about arrangements. She thought about Regina, about choices and courage, about love, that stayed when things got hard. Hey, she said softly. He looked up. Thank you for letting me in. His smile, slow and real, warmed the entire room. Thank you for being worth the risk. Outside, the snow transformed Winston-Salem into a winter wonderland, and somewhere, in that blanket of white, two hearts beat stronger for having faced their first real storm together. Snow continued to fall as Ramon drove them to Quanto Basta, Winston-Salem's most exclusive Italian restaurant. Callie sat in the back of the luxury SUV with Thorn, their hands linked, watching fat snowflakes dance in the headlights. You know what this reminds me of, she said softly. What's that? The snow globe my grandmother gave me when I was little. She said every snowfall is a chance to see the world fresh. Thorn squeezed her hand. We could use some fresh perspective tonight. The restaurant had been prepared for their arrival. A discreet ramp had been installed at the side entrance, and their table was perfectly positioned for wheelchair access. Catherine and Robert were already seated, looking like they'd stepped out of a Boston Social Pages. The snow is dreadful, Catherine commented as they settled in. Though I suppose you're used to more moderate winters here. Actually, Callie said, Winston-Salem can get quite dramatic weather. Last year, my students and I turned a snow day into a creative writing exercise. They wrote stories about weather spirits having snowball fights. Robert raised an eyebrow. How imaginative. That's what makes Callie an exceptional teacher, Thorn said, his voice carrying quiet pride. She helps children see magic in the ordinary. The waiter arrived with wine, and Callie noticed how he addressed Thorn directly, not looking to others to order for him. She'd learned that such simple respect wasn't always guaranteed. Son, Robert began after their orders were placed, we've been reviewing the company's latest quarterly reports. The neural interface project is exceeding expectations, Thorn replied, shifting into business mode. Trial results are promising. Yes, but the focus on adaptive technology. Catherine paused. We wonder if you're limiting your market too severely. Thorn's jaw tightened. You mean, am I letting my personal situation dictate business decisions? We're concerned about objectivity, Robert said. After the accident, your entire strategic direction changed. Because I saw a need that wasn't being met. Thorn's voice was controlled, but Callie felt the tension in him. Do you know how many people lose their independence because technology isn't designed for their capabilities? How many brilliant minds are sidelined because they can't access standard interfaces? Of course we understand the humanitarian aspect, Catherine interjected. But as major shareholders, I think it's brilliant, Callie said quietly. All eyes turned to her. The strategic shift, she continued, meeting Catherine's gaze. It's not just humanitarian, it's revolutionary business sense. Thorn took a personal insight and turned it into market innovation. He's not just creating products, he's opening doors for millions of people who've been ignored by mainstream tech companies. Ms. Wren, Robert began, but she wasn't finished. You know what I see in my classroom? Children who think differently, learn differently, move differently. They're not broken, they're unique. Thorn understands that. He's building a future where difference isn't disability, where adaptation isn't weakness. Silence fell. Thorne's hand found hers under the table. You feel quite strongly about this, Catherine observed. I feel strongly about him, Callie replied simply. About his vision, his courage, his heart. And I wish you could see what I see. Not a son who needs protection, but a man who's transformed challenge into purpose. The waiter returned with their meals, providing a moment for the words to settle. When he left, Robert was studying Thorne with new eyes. The neural interface prototype, he said slowly. Could you explain the medical applications? For the next hour, father and son talked medicine and technology, Robert's professional interest gradually overcoming his paternal concern. Callie watched Thorne come alive, explaining complex concepts with passionate clarity. Catherine touched Callie's arm. Would you help me find the ladies' room? In the elegant powder room, Catherine faced Callie directly. You must understand. When Regina left, it nearly destroyed him, not just his heart, his sense of self-worth. I know, Callie said gently, and I understand your fear. But Thorne isn't the same man he was then. He's stronger, wiser, and so deeply loved. By you? By me. By his employees who see his vision. By my students who think Mr. Thorne's robot chair is the coolest thing ever. Callie smiled at the memory of his last classroom visit. He doesn't need protection anymore. He needs acceptance. Catherine was quiet for a moment. When did you know that this was real? The moment he trusted me with his fear. Callie answered honestly. When he let me see past the walls. Everything since then has just been falling deeper. Back at the table, they found Thorne showing Robert something on his tablet. Design. Specs for new adaptive interface controls. The tension from earlier had eased, replaced by cautious understanding. After dinner, as they waited for their cars, Catherine pulled Thorne aside. Callie couldn't hear their conversation, but she saw the moment his shoulders relaxed, saw him nod in response to whatever his mother said. In the car heading home, snow still falling softly, Thorne was quiet. You okay? Callie asked. My mother apologized, he said, sounding slightly stunned. Said she'd been so focused on protecting me that she forgot to see me. He turned to look at her. What did you say to her? Just the truth, that you're the strongest person I know and that love isn't about protection, it's about partnership. Thorne brought her hand to his lips. Have I told you lately that you're remarkable? Not in the last hour. Seriously, Callie. His eyes were intense in the dim car. What you said about the company, about seeing different abilities, that's exactly what I've been trying to articulate. You understand the vision because you live it every day in your classroom. Maybe that's why we found each other, she mused. We both believe in seeing people for who they are, not what they can or can't do. Back at his penthouse, they found Catherine and Robert had sent a gift, a rare first edition of The Little Prince with a note, for your future library, for all the stories yet to be told. Callie traced the book's weathered spine as Thorne wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her onto his lap. Moving forward, not protection, he murmured into her hair. Exactly. She turned to face him. Though I reserve the right to protect you from your terrible movie choices. His laugh was free, unburdened. One bad sci-fi film and you never let me forget it. Radioactive zombie dinosaurs, Thorne, in space. It was classic cinema. They settled into their evening routine, Callie reading aloud from their new book while Thorne made hot chocolate. Outside, the snow created a quiet blanket over the city, and inside, love had once again proved stronger than fear. Later, as they sat on the balcony under warm blankets, watching the city lights twinkle through the snowfall, Thorne said softly, "Thank you for fighting for us." "Always," Callie replied, snuggling closer. "Besides, your parents just needed to see what I see." "And what's that?" "A future worth building, together." The snow fell softer now, and somewhere in the quiet night, two hearts beat stronger for having weathered another storm. for having broken through walls built of fear and history, for having found in each other not just love, but understanding, true partnership, and the courage to keep moving forward, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The January rain fell in icy sheets across Winston-Salem as Callie hurried into the ivory room, her heart racing, not from the weather but from Thorne's cryptic message. Same table, where it all began, 7 p.m. 3 months had passed since his parents' visit, months filled with deepening love and growing dreams. They'd fallen into a comfortable rhythm. Breakfast for dinner on Wednesdays, weekend movie marathons, her reading manuscripts of children's stories while he worked on new adaptive technology designs. But something had been different lately. Thorne had been distracted, almost secretive. Even Ramon's usual unflappable demeanor seemed charged with anticipation. The hostess smiled in recognition. "Ms. Wren, this way, please." The wrong table, their table, waited empty except for a single envelope propped against a wine glass. Callie's hands trembled slightly as she opened it, finding a note in Thorne's precise handwriting. 3 months ago, you told my parents that love isn't about protection, it's about partnership. Tonight I want to show you what that means. Turn around. She did, and her breath caught. Thorne was there, looking devastatingly handsome in a charcoal suit, his wheelchair positioned. With perfect precision. "Hi," he said softly. "Hi yourself." She noticed his hands were gripping his armrests tightly, a sure sign of nerves. "What's going on?" Instead of answering, he pressed a button on his chair's control panel. A mechanical whir filled the air, and slowly, steadily, his wheelchair began to rise and transform. Hydraulic supports extended, and before Callie's astonished eyes, Thorne was brought to a standing position, supported by an exoskeleton framework integrated into his chair. "Oh my God," she whispered. "The Neural Interface Project?" His voice was slightly strained with concentration. "It wasn't just for computers. We've been developing adaptive mobility systems. This prototype, it lets me stand, for short periods at least." Tears filled Callie's eyes as she understood. All those late nights, the secretive meetings, the distracted conversations. He'd been working toward this moment. "But that's not why I asked you here," Thorne continued. "I'm standing because what I want to say next should be said at eye level." Her heart stopped as he reached into his jacket pocket, producing a small velvet box. "Callie Wren," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You walked into my life by accident and stayed by choice. You saw past every wall I built, every fear I harbored. You made me believe in second chances and wrong tables and love that doesn't need fixing because it was never broken." Tears were flowing freely down her cheeks. Ow. Around them, the restaurant had gone silent. "I can't kneel," Thorne said with a small smile, "but I can ask you standing on my own 2 feet if you'll marry me. Not because I need you, but because I want to spend the rest of my life choosing you, challenging you, loving you, building our future together, one adaptation at a time." He opened the box, revealing not a traditional engagement ring, but his old watch, the one he'd worn since college, now transformed into a ring with its face nestled among diamonds and white gold. "Time stopped for me after the accident," he explained, "until you sat at this table and started it again. Will you marry me, Callie? Make more beautiful mistakes with me? Write our story together?" Through her tears, Callie stepped closer, her hands coming up to cup his face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to everything. All of it. Always." Their kiss was gentle, mindful of his precarious balance but filled with promise. When they parted, the restaurant erupted in applause. "I can't believe you did this," she said, laughing through her tears as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "The standing technology. Had to make sure it worked before I tried it in public," he admitted, slowly lowering back into his seated position. "Though I think Ramon aged 10 years during testing." As if summoned, Ramon appeared with champagne, followed by Tessa, who burst from her hiding spot taking photos. "You knew?" Callie accused her best friend. "Girl, I helped him design the ring." Tessa hugged her tightly. "And I'm not the only one who knew." The restaurant doors opened again, admitting Catherine and Robert Ellison, followed by Callie's students and their parents. The children rushed forward carrying hand-drawn cards and flowers. Mr. Thorne said we could help celebrate, one little girl explained, presenting Callie with a drawing of two stick figures, one standing, one in what appeared to be a rocket-powered wheelchair. This is why they've been so giggly lately, Callie realized, looking at her class. They knew. They helped me practice standing, Thorne admitted. During my last classroom visit, turned it into a science lesson about adaptive technology. Catherine approached, her eyes soft. When Thorne told us his plans, well, we couldn't miss this moment. She hugged Callie tightly. Welcome to the family, officially. The evening turned into an impromptu engagement party. Callie's students presented a story they'd written together. The princess who found her prince at the wrong table. Robert discussed the medical implications of the standing technology with Thorne's development team. And through it all, Callie couldn't stop staring at her ring, time frozen at the exact moment she'd first sat at this table, now transformed into a promise of future moments. Later, after the celebration wound down and they were alone in Thorne's penthouse, Callie curled in his lap on the balcony. I can't believe you managed to keep this secret, she said, watching her ring catch the city lights. Wasn't easy. Especially the standing practice, he kissed her temple. Worth it, though, to see your face. You didn't need to stand to propose, she said softly. You know that, right? I know. But I wanted to. Not for you, for me. To show myself that I can still surprise myself, still grow, still adapt. His arms tightened around her. Just like I want to keep growing with you, finding new ways to navigate life together. Callie turned to face him. I love you, not for standing or sitting or any physical thing, for your heart, your mind, your soul. I love you too. He smiled. Even when you cry at coffee commercials. That puppy finding its way home was emotional. Their laughter mixed with the night air, and somewhere in Winston-Salem, a wrong table had finally led to everything right. A mistake had become destiny, and two people who had never expected to find each other were planning forever. One beautiful adaptation at a time. Spring painted Winston-Salem in cherry blossoms and promise as Callie stood before the floor-length mirror in the bridal suite of the Graylin estate. Her wedding dress, a flowing creation of silk and lace, caught the April sunlight streaming through antique windows. Almost ready? Tessa asked, adjusting the delicate veil. Because your groom is out there looking so nervous, he might wear out his wheelchair battery doing circles. Callie laughed, touching the ring on her finger. Thorne's transformed watch still keeping perfect time. 6 months of planning, of dreams, of love growing deeper with each passing day, had led to this moment. Wait, she said suddenly. I need my something borrowed. Tessa produced a familiar book, the first edition of The Little Prince that Catherine and Robert had given them. Already got it. We're using it for the readings, remember? The gardens of the estate had been transformed for the ceremony. Accessible pathways wound through blooming flowers, and chairs were arranged to create clear sightlines and easy movement. Every detail had been chosen with intention, making the space welcoming for all abilities. As Callie prepared to walk down the aisle, she caught glimpses of their gathered loved ones. Her students dressed in their finest, clutching the paper flowers they'd made. Thorne's development team, who had become family over months of shared dinners and technology demonstrations. Catherine and Robert, their faces proud and peaceful. And Thorne. He waited at the altar, handsome in his tuxedo, his specialized chair polished to gleaming perfection. But it was his expression that caught her heart. Pure joy, untainted by doubt or fear. Their eyes met as she began her walk, and suddenly they were back at that wrong table, strangers about to become everything to each other. The ceremony itself was a celebration of adaptation and love. They'd written their own vows, words crafted from months of shared experiences and growing understanding. Callie, Thorne began, his voice steady and sure. I promise to be your partner in all things. To face each challenge with courage, knowing you're beside me. To celebrate every victory, big or small. To keep finding new ways to dance, new paths to explore, new stories to write together. I promise to love you not in spite of our differences, but because of how beautifully they fit together. Tears sparkled in Callie's eyes as she spoke her vows. Thorn, I promise to be your equal in all adventures. To see you always as you are, brilliant, strong, and extraordinary. To face each day with the same courage that brought you back to life and love. I promise to keep sitting at wrong tables and making beautiful mistakes, knowing they lead to perfect moments like this. To love you not because you need me, but because together we're more than we ever dreamed possible. When they kissed as husband and wife, their assembled guests erupted in cheers. Callie's students threw their paper flowers into the air, creating a shower of color and joy. The reception was a blend of elegance and warmth. Tables were named after children's books, and at each place setting sat a special surprise. Advance. Copies of Callie's first published book, The Wrong Table. I can't believe you managed to keep this secret, Thorn said, holding his copy with pride. The cover showed a whimsical illustration of a restaurant where nothing was quite as it seemed, and tables had personalities of their own. Revenge. For your standing proposal, Callie teased. She opened the book to its dedication. For Thorn, who taught me that the best stories begin with beautiful mistakes. That love doesn't need fixing, that the wrong table can lead to the rightest heart. During their first dance, Thorn used his standing technology briefly, holding Callie close as they swayed to soft music. But it was later when he'd returned, to his chair, that they shared their most intimate moment of the night. I have something for you, he said, producing a small box. Inside lay a key pendant, matching the one he'd given her months ago. But this one was different, embedded, with technology. It's connected to the house, he explained. Every door, every system, everything adapted to work for both of us. Because home isn't about what we can or can't do. It's about building a space where we both belong. Callie kissed him, not caring who saw. I love you, she whispered against his lips. So much. Later, as the reception wound down, they found themselves in a quiet moment on the estate's terrace. The spring air was soft with possibility, and fairy lights twinkled in the gathering dusk. Mrs. Ellison, Thorn said, testing the name. Yes, Mr. Wrong Table, she replied, sitting in his lap as they watched the stars emerge. Do you remember what you wrote in your book, the last line? Callie smiled, reciting from memory. Sometimes love doesn't arrive with promises, but with fear, and that's okay. Because when it's real, it stays. Even after all the truths are revealed. Did you know? He asked softly. That day at the restaurant, did you have any idea we'd end up here? Not consciously, she admitted, but my heart might have. It recognized something in you, even then. Something worth staying for. Inside, they could hear their guests celebrating. Tessa was probably organizing some outrageous game. Their students were undoubtedly sneaking extra cake, and their families were becoming even more intertwined with each passing hour. What happens next? Thorn asked, his arms secure around her waist. Well, Callie mused, I have some ideas for my next book, and your neural interface project is entering final testing, and we have that house to fill with memories. And mistakes to make? Beautiful ones, she assured him. The best kind. As if on cue, a shooting star streaked across the sky. They watched it together, two hearts beating in perfect synchronization, two souls who had found each other by wonderful accident. Thank you, Thorn said suddenly. For what? For sitting at the wrong table. For staying when it got hard. For seeing me. Really seeing me. Callie turned in his lap to face him. Thank you for letting yourself be seen. For being brave enough to love again. For making every table feel like the right one as long as you're there. Their kiss was soft, full of promise and future, and endless possibilities. Above them, stars continued their ancient dance, And somewhere in the vast universe, fate smiled at a plan well executed, a wrong table that had led to everything right. Inside their hearts, both Callie and Thorne knew that this wasn't an ending but a beginning. Their story would continue to unfold page by page, day by day, adaptation by adaptation, because the best love stories don't end with happily ever after. They grow richer with each new chapter, each shared challenge, each beautiful mistake that leads to unexpected joy. And in Winston-Salem, a city that had witnessed their journey, from strangers to soulmates, spring continued its eternal dance of renewal and hope. Promise bloomed in cherry blossoms and starlight, in wrong tables and right hearts, in love that saw beyond surface to soul, beyond limitation to possibility. In the end, their story was simple. Two people who found each other by accident and stayed by choice, who learned that love doesn't need fixing when it was never broken, who discovered that sometimes the wrong turn leads to the rightest destination. And they lived their love story, not in spite of their differences, but because of how perfectly imperfect they were together. Winston-Salem Library's children's section buzzed with excitement as dozens of small faces looked up expectantly at Callie Ellison. She sat in a comfortable reading chair, while beside her, Thorne watched with quiet pride as she held up her newest book. The Robot Prince and the Paper Star, she began, showing the colorful illustrations to her eager audience. The book's dedication page caught the light. For my students who taught me that every heart has wings, even if some need different ways to fly. In the front row, her third-grade class from last year, now fourth graders, grinned knowingly. They'd been part of the inspiration for this story about a prince whose mechanical wheelchair could transform into anything he imagined, and the origami artist who taught him that different kinds of magic could work together. The neural interface technology that Ellison Tech had developed was now helping thousands of people across the country. Thorne's standing mechanism had evolved into a full line of adaptive mobility solutions, each one making independence more accessible for those who needed it. But perhaps their greatest collaboration sat in a baby carrier beside Callie's chair, 1-month-old Luna Grace Ellison, sleeping peacefully through her mother's animated reading voice. She had Thorne's blue eyes and Callie's wavy hair, and her arrival had sparked a whole new series of beautiful adaptations in their lives. Their home had become a testament to creative problem-solving. Every space was designed for both wheelchair and standing access, allowing Thorne to share fully in baby duties. The nursery featured innovative adaptive equipment that they were already planning to develop for other parents with mobility challenges. As Callie finished the story, a small hand shot up. "Ms. Ellison, is it true that you and Mr. Thorne met because you sat in the wrong place?" Callie exchanged a smile with her husband. "Sometimes," she answered, "the wrong place turns out to be exactly where you're meant to be." Later that evening, as they sat on their balcony watching the sunset, Luna cradled in Thorne's arms, Callie pulled out the worn first edition of The Little Prince, their constant companion through every new chapter. "You know what this reminds me of?" Thorne asked, looking at their daughter. "What's that?" "What the fox said about taming, about creating bonds." He touched Luna's tiny hand with a finger. "About being responsible for what you've tamed." "Look, at you getting philosophical in your old age," Callie teased, says the woman who still cries at coffee commercials. Their laughter mixed with the evening breeze, and above them the first star appeared, bright and constant like the love that had begun at a wrong table and grown into everything right. Have you ever experienced a mistake that turned into the best decision of your life? Just as Callie discovered that sitting at the wrong table led her to true love, and Thorne realized that his greatest limitation became his greatest strength, we all have moments when fate seems to work in mysterious ways. That job you didn't want but took and changed your life? That chance meeting that turned into a lifelong friendship? That no that led to a much bigger yes? Share with us, what was your wrong table moment that ended up being exactly where you should have been? Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below, letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.